Welcome to another episode of the EsportsNext Podcast. I am your host, John Davidson, and today my guest is Cole Price. He is the Director of NIL at the Advantage Center at the prestigious University of Alabama. Thank you for joining me today, Cole.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to have you. We first met, I guess it's been a couple months now, but the University of Alabama had a fantastic sports symposium where they brought together leaders in sports, media, and esports. I was very thankful to be one of the speakers speaking on esports. You were one of the experts as well. And I thought it was one of the best events I've ever been to from the standpoint of how well it was run. Obviously, the facilities at Alabama are absolutely amazing, but also it was just such a great group of people who really knew their stuff, but were also good people. And so our networking events get to know each other. I felt they built such strong bonds that it's kind of unique in a situation like that.
Yeah. It's funny. It was something when Keenan Brown and the group over there had their launch event. I can't remember how exactly I got invited to it, but the name alone was like, hey, this is something I definitely want to go check out. And
Yeah,
then really forcing my way in of like, hey man, like I want to get to know you, like I want to know what you're doing, and then to see what they brought to fruition, like you said, it was really cool, awesome event, great people, a lot of good sharing. So excited to have this follow up with you, and then looking ahead to more things in the summer. So really cool time,
absolutely.
a lot of great conversation with so many things happening that are emanating from college campuses.
100%. Yeah, we're thrilled to have you at Esports Next 2024 in Chicago, July 7th through 9th. It's going to be an incredible time. I love the theme we have around, with NASCAR there and how esports and traditional sports are collaborating to benefit both and to keep traditional sports relevant with younger fan bases. And so that's obviously a perfect segue with what you do. You are obviously at one of the most well-known sports colleges in the United States, and you are right there in the heart of relevance with NIL. Tell us a little bit about the Advantage Center and, what does your role look like over there?
Yeah, the Advantage Center was kind of the culmination between our working at Alabama, but on the Learfield property side was a big vision point in our renewal discussions between Cole Gahagan, our CEO, and Greg Byrne, the athletic director at Alabama. Of hey, like as NIL continued to evolve, as NCAA guidance continued to evolve, looking and them agreeing that, man, we really need a physical space here dedicated to NIL that is, a safe place that the student athletes know. It kind of takes it all out of this sphere of like NIL is just out there and it's just this thing, and brought it to a singular place on campus where our group can work multifaceted with student athletes, right? So our first priority here is with our corporate partners and engaging them with NIL, bringing them into better education and understanding and utilization of, hey, like, how does this work with the traditional sponsorship pieces you're buying and using for your brand?
Mm.
Um, and so then you get to, help educate the student athlete. You get to on NIL, on corporate partnership, on financial literacy, right? There's so many things we can do just on that stand front. You get to know them personally. You get to develop who they are, what their personal profiles are, um, and where that syncs up with partners, or where that helps our sales staff go and pitch new partners. Um,
Yeah.
and then the kind of identification for them of like, where I kind of say like NIL shouldn't be our student athletes' main focus, right? Like if that ever happens, they're missing the boat. Um,
Yeah.
their education, their athletic, pursuits, that those are the main things. But this is the most practical thing that's ever happened for them, where the exposure they have to new things, the finding within their rhythm of time in season and out of season to figure out the right structure that fits their schedule, and the things that they're interested in doing, or um, having opportunities to explore. Where when they get to the end of being in Alabama now, they can look and say, "Well, I have this pro option, or I have this sport option. I have my education degree that I've learned something in, and that's great. But now, hey, I have like maybe three or four other potential income streams for myself for the rest of my life, and I got to develop that and figure that out while at Alabama. And so, um, in a holistic kind of approach, that's how we work on it, with a few other partners here, related to Alabama. So it's been really cool. Lots happened, in a year. Really, us getting set in this space,
Hmm.
and excited for future potential.
Yeah, I appreciate all that context. I feel like NIL, which for those who don't know, stands for name, image, and likeness. It's been the buzzword this year in sports, right? Specifically in college sports. And there's everything from awesome, these kids who have put their bodies on the line and are bringing in all this revenue because of their talent that the school is benefiting from. That's one narrative. There's been a narrative of, especially directly with Alabama, you see coaches for a variety of reasons, of course, but you see some iconic coaches who are stepping away from the game. And, your iconic head coach, arguably the greatest of all time in football, is one of those who has stepped aside for a number of reasons, not, of course, solely just NIL, but some people have pointed, hey, this is pushing out, that generation of coaches. Um, there's also a bit of a narrative of, oh, every kid who comes to a recruiter, they're just the first and only thing they want to discuss is what's my number? I need 1 million, I need 2 million, I need 500,000, what have you. There's a lot of questions in the NIL space, right? I'm definitely not an expert. I enjoy listening to the Dan Patrick show, so that's a lot of my context. But can you help our listeners understand what exactly, concisely, what is name, image, and likeness really?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, for name, image, and likeness, the bad PR, has significantly impacted the slow progression the space has had. In its most basic level, the right the student athlete has to utilize their name, image, likeness, in a way to profit off of that from marketing, opportunities, which, right, can be marketing opportunities is a very broad term. There's
Yep.
so many things that a student athlete can do, and in return, for someone in the open marketplace wanting to work with them and have them do those things, they're able to make money from it. And I
Yep.
think some people look at it and say, now in retrospect, 40, 50 years ago, there could have been a totally different plan. It could have been rolled out over a long period of time and developed in a certain way. Uh, Fortunately or unfortunately, that didn't happen. You look at the U.S. Olympic situation and what those student athletes were able to do with the Olympics. You look at
Yeah.
non-athletic related things like the military, right? They have a unique structure of how those kids go in the military and serve and have higher education benefits. There's so many creative things that were out there that now, in retrospect, it's like, why wasn't anybody really thinking about those things? And
Yeah.
yet, in the same vein, yeah, looking at it very simplistically, that it is these student athletes are getting the opportunity now to add practical experience onto their education, um, and that realize for some of them they need it, but realizing that they have potential outside of maybe only thinking it was the sport, and where that
Sure.
opportunity is for them, that they can start learning now. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I think that's really what it is. It's the exposure to new things. It's the practical experience. It is the learning curve to for these people that the group before them that never had it. Right, there is this crazy notion that, like, they come to college, they do the sport, they get their education. When they're done, they enter the pro world, whether business or sport, and they don't have a lot of context to it. They
Right.
don't have any practical experience because they couldn't, and everything. was very weird, right? Even the example of someone necessarily couldn't pick up a kid in a car and drive him to class because that might be considered a extra benefit, right?
Right,
Right or wrong, indifferent of what the rules were to structure competition, which is true, right? And I think every coach would agree that to have competition, it has to be equitable. Like
right.
otherwise, what are we playing? But once you get outside of the framework of that, limiting their practical experience, that's only going to help them so that we don't continue to have the stats that have been shared about pro sports and bankruptcy and years out of the pro leagues and all those things that hey now they're learning those things in a controlled environment that is for their benefit so
Right.
that hey if they have a pro option they're getting to do that and they're actually knowing how to operate business interests investment other things they do in their out of season time
Yeah,
or they don't have that route they become professionals in the business world and they're not dependent on one single source of income.
that's right. And, I think sometimes the best way to learn something is to be on the other side of that table. And so you talk about marketing, influencer marketing, negotiations, representing a brand, etc. You may have a number of these athletes, which what is the percentage from college that go to pro? Is it what is that percent? It's like 3% or something like that,
Yeah, I
or
mean, right. Yeah, it's very small in the totality of like the collegiate marketplace.
yeah, and I'm sure it's higher at Alabama because you have a lot of recruiting a lot of impressive players, especially in football. But my point being, you may have a number of these players who are on the college football field who discover something they never would have been aware of and also have deeper experiencing being the influencer themselves that then post graduation they say, wait a minute, I really like that. I know the experience from the influencer's perspective. Let me get on the other side of this table and work for a brand or an agency or something like that. And then
Right.
the other example, I think you make a really good point about the controlled environment when you're receiving money. I mean, sure, I'm sure these kids can spend money however they want, but it's probably a little bit different when you're on a college campus. You can also take a finance class or something similar versus I'm with the grown men in the NBA, and every game is a fashion walkout with dudes who are on their third contract of tens of millions of dollars. And, who knows what else is going on tours with dinners and, out on the road and things like that, trying to keep up with the Joneses, if you will. There's a lot of
Yeah.
benefits there.
Yeah. I mean, and controlled environment in the sense that like the higher education, the institution is there to support you. So there's
Hmm.
so many ways they can do that. There's so many resources at your disposal that do not exist in a professional context.
But
As
mhm,
well as just like yeah, everyone talks about them being, 18 to 22 years old or whatever, but like the in a lot of cases, the family's still very involved. Like that's going to be a family decision. It's not a
good point.
singular adult decision necessarily, and so that just allows for more cohesion, more synergy, where people want it. It's still their decision on how they operate those things and make decisions, but at least it's there. There are some, foolproof options of make sure, hey, we did everything in our power to make sure, and that's our goal, like to make sure you have the best experience possible. What I've said since the
Absolutely.
beginning at Alabama is we have 650 student athletes. Every one of them is going to have a different experience with NIL. As
Right.
long as we make sure that their experience they have is positive and as perfect as it can be, that's our job in
Hmm.
helping them. The same way it's our job on a sponsorship side with a partner. Hey, we want to make sure what they're coming to us for and how we're helping them, they're having the best experience possible. And so um, that goal is the same, but college does add a different layer of protection in that everyone's working towards because a lot of the bad PR, because a lot of the things that even they're examples of already. And so, you know, that is the exception. We want to be the
Right.
rule of how we help manage it.
Yeah, I love that. I've seen a lot of NIL related commercials, especially with March Madness. the rise in women's basketball,
Mm.
Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckers, these other players, and it's really cool to see college age athletes in these commercials. One perspective I've never heard, and this is my last question before we get into some esports stuff for those listening, but I've never heard the perspective of brands on NIL. And so I'm curious from your perspective of local brands and national brands, what is their response to having a new opportunity at new sponsorable assets who are young influencers?
Yeah, I think, for the things that are new, right? People tend to be uncomfortable with them. I think sometimes, early on, people got caught maybe putting the wrong emphasis on it, only thinking about it through this narrow pathway because of what they do about influencer marketing, um, and or really putting unnecessary, I don't want to call it stress, but like unnecessary additional stress on student athletes' performance versus if they were going to go do the same thing with a pro athlete, they would never have looked at the same way,
Hmm.
and or automatically assumed because they're college kids, there's more likelihood for something negative to happen. And so
Hmm.
I think those are things that have been able to be dispelled, and you just have to talk through it. You have to have the time to educate and walk them through all the potential. And I think as more have experienced it themselves, but also seen competitors do things, it's allowed for more questions to be asked, to be like light bulbs go off to, oh, like I never would have thought about it that way, or that, having a student athlete at an event you're hosting or for a private meeting with, a client of yours. Like there's so many things that can be done and where student athletes can be, again, utilized where they can have exposure.
Hmm.
Where, I mean, again, we have 650. Their personalities are amazing. Like
Right.
these are some amazing kids. And so, addressing that and looking and saying, hey, like, yeah, local partners, there are different needs and different possibilities because of the ease of being local. Versus a national partner, some things are harder, but hey, like the way that we think about it and the way that we strategize, I mean, that's kind of what we spent the last year building up is proof of concept and point of view on things that are really exciting and awesome that have been produced. And, as we look forward, it's only going to continue to evolve and develop in a positive way.
Very, very interesting. It's such a interesting, brave new world with everything opening up in new ways and exciting to see where it goes. And you're there at the forefront of it. Tell me, you have quite a bit of experience in the traditional sports space. How did you get interested in esports originally?
Yeah, so I'll definitely say I've learned most of it through maybe osmosis, but my brother having been a gamer, loved consoles. I'm a good bit younger than both of my brothers, so grew up kind of more watching them play than playing. But
I
even
can
like,
relate to that.
yeah,
I have an older
um,
brother, and I've spent some time on the couch watching him and the neighbor play. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
exactly. Yeah, that was a lot of growing up, and then, but they were so much older, playing with friends and really it's kind of funny. So I ran the trademark licensing program here at Alabama, and when esports really started you know causing some waves in collegiate athletics, um, a couple of us here were able to interface with the student organization that got started at Alabama and some of the conversations around that, really getting an insight into gameplay and, a little bit more than my brother was sharing on what games were being played, figuring out, how Alabama might look at it. Um, and so, that's where I kind of really got deeper into esports on the collegiate level, understanding what was going on, seeing a lot of the interest around it, right? A lot of the events going on, sponsors that were involved, and so that was always really interesting. I and it, what stuck out what blew my mind was like meeting students that were in our engineering program or data science, and were using coding and using things that they were specifically saying they were learning that they were using to influence their gameplay. And when I
Hmm.
heard that, I was like, okay, we're talking about some context now that like is really on a different level than I would have ever assumed or imagined. And I think really cool to the development of like, man, people from the outside looking in, especially right, let's call it what it is, like the older generation of just people to look and say, oh, these kids are wasting time and energy. Why would they be playing video games? And the
Right.
stuff that I jokingly might hear my dad say to my brother, in years past, like, no, 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 like there's a different context to this that is the same way we don't talk about, uh, or it would have been said growing up, right? You don't need to sit so close to the TV, and now we all carry a phone in our pocket and look at it, right here.
That's
Uh,
right.
it feels like the same kind of analogy. So, seeing that and really experiencing it and watching the space develop is over the last number of years, that's what really got me into it.
Yeah, a thing that really hit me years ago when I first heard it is not all screen time is created equal. And so when we're watching television, that's extremely passive. It's just, that's one thing I remember growing up and hearing like, well, when you're reading a book, your mind is working and you're developing those pictures and your imagination is working all these things. When I'm watching television, it's just feeding everything through my eyeballs into my brain, and I'm just, melting away, allegedly,
Right.
according to my parents. Well, if you look at video games, and not just non-competitive games, but specific, which have benefits as well, but specifically the team-based competitive games, which are esports, is number one, you're on a team. And so, other than the physical exertion component, you are experiencing the same benefits that we know and love about team-based sports,
Mm.
right? The camaraderie is a huge thing, the teamwork is a huge thing, the principles,
Strategy.
strategies that you're learning from a coach who is, every coach will tell you this is more than about a sport, it's about life, right?
Yeah.
And raising young men and women, etc., learning to win, learning to lose. And so you have all of these benefits that are not obvious, especially to people who didn't grow up playing video games. Then you have an additional benefit of the skills that people, if you're playing a lot of video games, you're likely have some sort of a tech background, sometimes subconsciously or not on accident, right?
Mm.
Because you got to figure out how to plug everything together. Or you might find interest in a live event with the AV production. Shoutcasting is huge. Streaming, I got to set up my webcam and how am I setting up my audio to record and
Mm.
video editing. Now I'm editing these videos and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's not only providing so many benefits from a team-based, atmosphere that we know and love, but it's developing so many skills that can be relevant, yes, within esports, but also within so many different industries which are relevant to the workforce of today and tomorrow. And
Sure.
that's
Yeah. No, and it all goes back to exposure, right? How much more exposure can someone have to the things that are going to create skills and then also reinforce the confidence that
mhm.
someone has the skills and knows how to use them or how they can be adapted.
Yep.
And that, I think both of those, like when you look at that in on the esports side, and then how I look at it on the NIL side, the fact that those have kind of started here more so of living in the higher education world just
Uh-huh.
makes that much more sense because of it.
That's right. Well, I'm also curious, you did a fantastic job of explaining what NIL is and all the different factors and the consequences of those things. How do you see NIL impacting esports, as esports is relatively new on college campuses compared to the traditional sports?
Yeah, right. I think it will in the sense that name, image, and likeness until the last 3 years has always existed. but for different groups of people.
Okay.
Um, so, when you go back, like students having internships, student worker jobs, like anything that now, like we have influencers on this campus that are not athletes that I'm sure are making significant money. And yet they're just regular college students. So, NIL has been maybe a greater education for everyone at large that, oh, wait, like this needed to apply in a different way to this group of people because of the worries around competitive balance and NCAA,
Yeah.
rules and regulations. I think when you think about that on the esports side, it's like, well, it's kind of the best of both worlds because you have the regular student nature of it. The question around amateurism may or may not be a factor. I don't know how significant of an issue it is, but right, you go back with like tennis and golf and surfing. Like there have been
Uh-huh.
certain things where like kids at really young ages have technically entered sponsorship deals or endorsement deals with brands.
Yeah.
Esports can and should be adapting in those same ways. And yet at the same side, when you get to the collegiate level, when you get to the professional level of that sport, that industry at large, the way that brands can think about it, the way things relate, is no different. And there are unique ways that it has attributes that are going to be that much more defined and unique, right? So when I think about it, you know, people because of America and sports, right? They always college look at football. Well, in the same vein, from a track student athlete standpoint, there are going to be different brands that might highly value those people because of that sport and because of those things and attributes about them. The
Yeah.
same goes for esports, right? You have such a different um, opportunity with the potential for companies, brands, the alignment that can come to fruition that can be really cool and different. Um, and that I don't want to say maybe it's all incremental, but it's all unique enough that it's not like no area is pulling from the other in this case. They're not competitive. They are mutually exclusive. Like they have the ability to grow on their own and be combined and find mutual benefit. So I think that's a really cool, interesting thing on how esports continues to evolve and develop, and where those partnerships can get that much more defined and unique. Because to your point, like on the you were saying about NIL and like where some of those things can grow. Um, on the esports side, like you look and say, and I used to bring this up in like the trademark licensing world I grew up in. Like there's so many things that once you get that exposure and the kid's eyes are open to, man, like I didn't know that this world could be something I play in, I can work in, and working in it, there are all these different jobs and roles. It's the first thing I say to someone that comes and wants to meet about working in college athletics. I'm like, well, that's a very general term. There are so many unique roles within college athletics. There's so
Hmm.
many unique worlds within the esports, the tech, the equipment world that, man, when you get that exposure and that opening to it, um, life can take people in a lot of cool directions. And I think from a team component, we talk about this for NIL, and it's come up more recently with student athletes where, especially on the social media influencer front, like, social media wasn't necessarily meant for influencers to be only by themselves on a screen recording something.
Sure.
Actually, like as you look at TikTok, and I know there's a lot of negativity around that right now, which is fine, but like that the videos maybe that do best are people doing things together because actually that is social interaction on a social platform that people can see in a social environment. So like when you start thinking about those things of gameplay, of other experiences that can be created, of where they'll get that, but also they'll learn about themselves, what strengths each has. So if I have five people and one's really good at creating the content, one's really good at the strategy around what content they should do, another's really good about something else, about posting and the copy, right? Like you start building all these facets of where, as a team, again, they all play a part.
Yeah.
Or that as they're doing things like literally in NIL, like, hey, if there's a person on the soccer team who really likes developing the strategy, like he or she could go do that for their whole team, right? You could,
Sure.
so all those verticals and all those things apply the same way on esports, and that's where then things get really big and scary and unique of like, man, like how do you help engage, and like you got to take it one day at a time to develop those thoughts and concepts for them of like, man, like there is so much more here than I ever would have imagined.
Yeah.
um that's really cool. I mean, that's where there's a lot of power in what it can still become and grow into.
Absolutely. And we are definitely in the early days. We're still in the early days of from an industry standpoint, just being a little over about 20 years old. But when you look at the amateur, the scholastic, specifically the collegiate level, that's even more recent as we've seen esports start at the pro level uniquely. Esports has grown the opposite way of traditional sports. Traditional sports, you and I start, let's say, pickleball and our friends in our neighborhood enjoy it, and then gains more momentum and fandom and excitement, and that grows from city, county, state, country, global, right?
Mm-hmm.
And esports is uniquely started with the pro ranks and it's
Yeah.
taken a few years for the bottom of the pyramid, which is amateur youth, which is high school, college, etc., to really form. And so as you said, NIL's only been around 3 years. It's been, I, I think, not much longer than a decade for some of the earliest collegiate programs, and many more have just come in the last handful of years. I would say if you look at the different activities that a college supports, different sports, right? Football, basketball, baseball, track, volleyball, etc. I would say, well, football is a good example. While everybody at Alabama, I'm sure, is a huge football fan, um, I would say video games is probably the one activity that most people do themselves. Even at the college age, you might be a huge football fan, but that doesn't mean you're playing football yourself, right?
Right.
All of these college students, the vast majority, are playing video games themselves. My question for you is, in the last handful of years where esports and gaming has come on the stage at the University of Alabama, how have you seen the response from the student body and other stakeholders on campus to this phenomenon that every kid is interested in?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, because of the traditional world here, right? It had a way internally that fit better on the campus side.
Uh-huh.
You know, through a student organization, more of the club route to a degree, and that, I think on the recruiting side of where the university's grown from a general student recruitment, not athletics recruitment, right? We are inching towards and have been around like 58 to 68 or 58 to 60% out of state. Been inching towards almost 60% female on campus. Um, but you look at those things of when they're talking to students about coming to Alabama and the competition Alabama is playing in to recruit students, um, having that be a part of the conversation is just another piece, right? Of here
Yeah.
are ways that you can have the best possible college experience. Our degree programs are growing, right? There was a big story years ago where a kid, you know, got an offer from every Ivy League school and turned them down to come be in the honors college at Alabama.
Uh-huh.
And so, they're probably always thinking about those things. And so, for how it can sit in that environment, but have the support, have the opportunity for, where does it go? Where does it continue to evolve at Alabama? Where would it continue to be positioned? Yeah, I think that's still a work in progress from everything I've seen of
Uh-huh.
what that's going to look like. Um, but in that controlled environment and the known that can develop there, there's definitely more willingness for the Alabama brand to be put by that, um, as they compete and as they have success and grow
Yeah.
and develop. And so I think more is still to come in its future here for sure. Um, there's no doubt about that. Versus where other institutions saw a greater opportunity for themselves to jump on those things, and right, some even went and tried to put in athletics and attach scholarships to it. There's probably different ways that's happening here, but happening right in a way that like, hey, like there's a way that in the same vein, like our adapted athletics program is really big, and that's been a huge recruitment aspect for Alabama, for those students, to get to experience those things. So I could definitely and would see, esports, still filling some type of opportunity like that here for
Yeah.
sure.
I think a big aspect of it is, administrators typically have no idea how to support this space. And it's the students, you mentioned student-led organizations. It's the students that really understand the phenomenon of gaming and can see through some of the stereotypes or the misconceptions. And, I always say a case study is better than an idea. And so I think, as you're seeing the clubs form and as you're seeing the competitive teams on an athletic side form and the success that maybe even if it's not your college, but others that you're close to and that you're watching, it opens the eyes of the administration and the snowball starts to roll downhill and say, okay, let's really embrace this thing. I didn't understand it at first, but now I see the passion, I see the interest, I see the engagement, I see the way that we're able to also support the educational, scholastic aspects of what we're trying to deliver to these kids through their favorite activity. And
Yeah,
and we're seeing that across the country and across the world right now at all sorts of universities.
yeah. And I mean, you're exactly right because the truest thing is, students change from year to year and definitely every 4 years. So
Sure.
having that, where a group takes ownership, develops it, builds it, and that's where it's gonna live on its own. And then by living and the exposure they get, how they handle conversations internally, how they're, all of our student organizations, right, have a faculty rep, that those people can give it the credence that it deserves. Uh,
Yeah.
I think colleges are entering the next phase in higher education where, um, that student success, that student experience. I mean, that tends to be a big point of a differentiation. Um,
Yep.
so
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to flip things over here in our last 10 minutes of our conversation to Esports Next, happening in Chicago once again, July 7th through 9th. I could be not be more thrilled. This is going to be our fourth in-person conference. It'll be our seventh total as we had some virtual events through COVID. This is the second year that Coca-Cola is our title sponsor, which was a huge lift last year. And it's the first year that our event is around the NASCAR Chicago Street Race, which is essentially an F1 version of NASCAR racing through the streets of Chicago. We've got panels with NASCAR and Coca-Cola. We have a viewing party the day before the conference on one of the turns overlooking the track and the city and the beautiful lake there. Share a little bit about what you're looking forward to in Chicago this summer, July 7th through 9th at Esports Next.
yeah, no, I mean, learning and networking and seeing, I'm excited to share and give a point of view that, hopefully is fresh and new for people to, kind of consider. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we work with NASCAR. They're a partner here at Alabama. So
Cool.
we got to take some student athletes to Talladega. Was super awesome. So seeing that culmination up there, and Coca-Cola is our pouring rights partner here. So those are really cool things. But just to some degree for me, it's great in the sense of being in an ecosystem for that week that's different than I live in day to day, and seeing what conversations y'all are talking about, getting to sit into sessions, and just where I know I'm going to have added value of how I think when I come back to things at Alabama. So a lot of the sharing of ideas and networking. Yeah, getting to like anything at this point in my life I get to do with my older brother is always a win too. So excited I get to do that with him.
Yeah, that's so awesome. He hails from the University of Kentucky. Heath Price, who will also be speaking at the conference, and you're going to be the first brother tandem that we will have speaking at Esports Next. So I don't know if we'll do a trophy or certificate or something, or we'll just find a way to authenticate it through the blockchain in some way,
Yeah,
no doubt.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Question for you. One of the things I love most about Esports Next is the diversity of the community, meaning not just in the ways that we typically think about diversity, but in different roles. You have a number of conferences where you go and it's all the same person, right? It's like we're all partnership people and we're just trying to sell each other stuff, or we're all tech people and we're just like nerding out on all the new tech, or fill in the blank of the different conferences. And we're so thankful that our membership base and our attendees of Esports Next are so diverse. From you've got educators from all the way from elementary up through college, who are learning what does esports mean for my classroom, or teaching this is what you should be doing. We've got representatives from different cities and states across the country saying this is how you drive economic impact through the local community, and also attracting big tournaments and such. We've got a number of different brands who are going to be sharing how they are marketing successfully. We've got developers. We've got a pro player, Ian Crim6 Porter. We're inducting into the ESTA Hall of Fame.
oh, wow.
He is the winningest Call of Duty player of all time and has pivoted his career into sim racing and now physical motorsports racing, and just won one of his first races. So it is action packed, and we couldn't be more excited. Who are the type of people or types of roles or companies that you are looking forward to meeting, whether it's to impact your current business or to learn something new?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, I mean, I would go towards definitely those people, hearing them talk about definitely how they think about influence, ways they're looking at that, whether that's, tech, social media side. Um, I think also like uh, anyone around, and even what y'all are doing with the event itself, but anything around event, right? And the creation of that, I think super interesting. There's a lot when you come to thought around what you and I've talked about a little bit, but where's the convergence between we have so many student athletes that play video games, and
Yeah.
you got the now EA college football coming back, and one of our student athletes recently we had to go speak to a group, and he did a great job. It was pretty brief, but he layered in some kind of dry comedy to his delivery, and we're leaving,
Hmm.
and I'm like, man, like that was awesome. Like you know, I'm getting to know you more. Like, where's that kind of come from for you? And he was like, man, he was like, after we play games, whether it's Call of Duty, whether it's something else, whether it is Madden or 2K, he's like, you know, after you win, you have to give the speech, and we're all playing online. And I was just like, he's thinking about that while he's talking to a bunch of business people.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
and yeah, just funny things that like, you know, as we look at all of this, like where does that come into a play with NIL? With whether it's the game creators, whether it's things with esports teams going on, like where do those merge? Because it's happening and it's existing. And like you were saying earlier before we jumped on, like we have some student athletes that you know they are playing the games and the sports that they compete in at Alabama. We have others that are only playing the first person shooter team stuff. So they are very specific if they do it what they do. There
Yeah.
aren't too many people that are just like, I play a little bit of everything. Usually they're pretty specific. So learning from others, and really a lot of what I don't know. Yeah, I think walking into new environments and just being open to be a sponge and just listen and say, man, like what there's going to be probably so much here that I can take in and in one way or another, it's going to help me. So I hope I can deliver as much back as I know I'm going to gain.
Yeah, well, that's very consistent to a lot of the attendees. And, last year, one of the greatest compliments I heard, and it wasn't necessarily a compliment for me or Megan or the team, but more for our community was they said, this is the best networking I've ever experienced at a conference. And that really goes to the mentality and the perspective that our community has of an others first mentality, not just a how many things can I sell you, and I sold a bunch of widgets at this conference, so I'm successful. But it's very much a what are your goals and what are you looking for, and a recognition that if everybody wins, we all win, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I mean this if I can say it in the most humble way possible. The jobs I've been in, especially at Alabama, when I've gone to conferences that are, to your point, usually you know, licensing conference or this conference, like I'm turning my tag around. I'm not wearing any Alabama apparel. I'm maybe putting in my back pocket to that point. Like usually I'm
Sure.
pretty scheduled. Like I know the meetings I'm going to have and I'm really intentional on this isn't vacation. It's time for me to learn or I got to work
Yeah.
on some business stuff. But to come into an environment like this, I kind of want to be seen as Alabama because I don't know what people are going to say. And I know mostly they're not going to be approaching me like I've experienced in the past. So
Mhm.
that'll be different and really liberating to walk in and just say, hey, yeah, like I want to get to know people and see what people are talking about.
Absolutely. Well, last question for you as we end this wonderful episode is simply, people have been listening of, you know, all your insights on NIL, your perspective on traditional sports and esports. I have no doubt people are wanting to engage with you, whether, to share some of their insights or learn more from you. What is the best way for people to get a hold of you in the ways that you'd like them to?
Yeah, my information because a part of Learfield is on rolltide.com for Alabama, but email cole.price at crimsontide.com. You can find me, James Cole Price, on Twitter, LinkedIn. And yeah, happy to interface with anybody, answer any questions or dive into any other concepts or topics moving forward. So, just appreciate you having me on today and definitely looking forward to being together in Chicago in July. It's going to be an awesome time. Appreciate everything y'all are doing and have done to build this up in the way that you have. Really cool and going to be awesome to experience it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us today. I learned a lot. I'm looking forward to learning a lot more in person in Chicago with you. And thank you for joining us today on the Esports Next podcast.
Thanks, man. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.